Session 7, the title is Coconut Generation, Hybridity and Hybrid Missiology, which is read by Dr. Sam George. It is my privilege to talking about him. As you can see in your books, Dr. Sam George is the Lausanne Movement catalyst for Diasporas. He is also the executive director of Parivar International and author of Understanding the Coconut Generation. I heard recently he has a new book. He wrote the books which title is Diaspora Christianites from Fortress Press. Am I right? And he also co-editors of Dr. Miriam Edney's. The book's title is Refugees Diaspora from William Carey Press. All right? So I'm very expect what he will say to us. So, Dr. Sam, are you ready to say? And what about you? Are you ready to hear from him? All right, so would you please welcome him? Here is Dr. Sam George.
Thank you, Barnabas. Before I launch into the paper, you will find the paper in page 70. Keep that open. And I want to kind of give you a little visual treat before we jump in. I'll read some sections, and I also want you to follow the slides, what I call as a bifocal engagement. Watch the screen and read simultaneously, because we are talking about hybridity after all, right? And so we'll see how we'll navigate. Before that, I just want to give you throw some images for you to wrap around your mind on this idea of hybridity. First of all, I don't know if you heard these names, like Zors, when cross between a zebra and a horse, and or Zonki, or Zonies. These are new realities when animals across categories mate. And wolf dogs, or they're called dolphs, dogs that are wolves. And how about this? Kimchi sandwich, or burgers. There are also tofus and teriyaki burgers and Maharaja vegetarian burgers. McDonald's has been creative in engaging and offering fusion of food. And it's all around us. What does it mean in the world of literature and music and other places that we see blending of genres and categories? How about this? Look at the donut there, or the hybrid car there. The musicians and the world of art has profoundly been on the cutting edge of the world of diasporas, mixing up things and fields and categories. So hybridity has become a lens through which much of reality is being refracted to us on a daily basis. How about this? This is not a real animal. It's primarily an imagination of the artist. So if you look at the whole world of hybridity, in many disciplines, they are actively engaged in this diasporic reality. We see in art, as I showed you some images, world of literature, profound, whether it's bilingual and the slangs that are coming, whether we speak Spanglish and things like that. World of music, mashup. I don't know if you listen to some mashup productions, what they're happening. Transnational realities and multicultural societies, racial reconciliation, integration efforts, political, ideological level. So as you can see, a variety of different disciplines on the edges and the margins of reality and trying to understand their respective disciplines are engaging in this reality. So hybridity is all around us. Not just cars and the hybrid courses that we offer now for our students, partly online, partly in class, and all those kind of things that is going on now. People are mixing up things and creating new realities altogether, lending and borrowing and stealing and copying and adapting to create new. Unprecedented levels of intermingling and exchanges are happening. So I kind of phrase and they say, hybridity, what does it mean when unlikely categories collide? And that's what the question I want to pose before you. I want to use coconut generation as a launching pad and explore some theoretical framework on hybridity, and then maybe jump into and close with two biblical characters that I want to unpack in light of mission of God and what does it mean, hybridized people, and introduce the whole idea of hybrid missiology. The page 70 of your book, we will get in there. I want to introduce you to the world of Americanized Asian Indians. I was a youth pastor in mid-90s in Philadelphia. First youth pastor of an immigrant church. It forced me to my own journey of growing up outside of India, in southeast of India, and trying to understand the world of the young people that I was ministering to. And I ended up writing this book called Coconut Generation. And it's all about identity struggles. And even now, I get stopped in the roadside and say, are you the coconut guy? I lost my identity, talking about identity and trying to understand the kids growing up in the US. So I want to kind of introduce you to this reality. What does it mean to be brown on the outside, white on the inside? It's a metaphor for Indian Americans or Westernized Asian Indians. They are the second and the third generation of Indian immigrants. I am at page 70, if you're following along. Coconut generation, that section there. Like a coconut, they are Westernized Indians are called brown on the outside, white on the inside. The color brown and the white signifies the two sides of the hybridized Indian American self. It's analogous to the metaphors of Oreo and bananas for other communities and children of other immigrants. It denotes the two sides of the emerging generation, sometimes diametrically opposite facts of a complex lived reality where neither narrative alone is sufficient to fully describe themselves. The brown side of coconuts embraces family, community, structure, order, emotional restraints, and respect for authority, while the white side prefers individuality, creativity, expressiveness, and autonomy. They essentially oppose sets of values, and coconuts live daily through this predicament by bringing the Eastern and the Western world together into this new hybridized self. Coconuts are also referred to as ABCD, American-born confused ACs, referring to a state of identity confusion prevalent among the second generation, which, however, the second generation, when they came of age, have recoined it as American-born confident Desis. There are other metaphors as well that include chai, blending of the brown and the milk. In India, people drink chai with milk all the time. Masalas and chicken tikka and some other metaphors are common as well about ABCDs. Page 71. The ontological reality of coconuts revolves navigating across the landmines of two or more cultures continually and stockpiling many trophies of battle scars of the diasporic displacements. For immigrants, the struggle is often geographic dislocation and survival in a foreign land, while for their progenies, it is cultural and psychological disruptions. Why do I look like one way but feel like another entirely different? The divergence between the nuances of the ancestral culture, which though never fixed but continually evolving, and the unconscious assimilation into host culture leaves children of immigrants with a convoluted stalemate. They exhibit an intense longing to belong, however, not fitting entirely into any of the worlds that are before them. Their miseries are multiplied on account of suffering from the Western notion of guilt, of wrongdoing, while they are also subjected to the Asian way of shaming behaviors. They exist in the precarious margins of societal groups, often falling through the many fissures found between them. They're generally misunderstood by others and frequently required to demonstrate their cultural competency concurrently in multiple worlds. The notion of identity confusion and caught in between cultures can feel like you are stuck in the middle, being neither here nor there, being on both sides of the shore at once. I want to show you a picture which appeared on the cover of National Geography a few years ago. This is a mother and a daughter living in the city of New York. She's a musician. She's a Carnatic musician, which is a South Indian classical genre. Look at her dress. She's wearing a sari, her jewelry, the flowers on her hair. All of that can locate her to a particular place in India, Tamil Nadu. Look at her daughter. Her clothing, her style. She is a Latin rapper. At least music is in the blood. The genres may be different. But if you meet them in the streets, you will never tell them that they're mother and daughter. So I argue that they're not just generation gap anymore. There is a generation gulf because of the high level of assimilation in some dominant cultures. Diasporic consciousness. That's the new Statue of Liberty, by the way. The Palestinian American Edward Said, one of the early proponents of the whole idea of third space and hybridity. His classical book called Orientalism came out way back in the 70s. So hybridity is not a new idea. It's been around for a while. So he says that it's true of hybrid coconuts. The pathos of the summer and the winter as much as the potential of spring are nearby but unobtainable. Exile is a life outside of habitual order, nomadic, decentered, contrapuntal. No sooner does one get accustomed to it than its unsettling forces erupts anew. The coconut generation is more westernized than we realize. They are more Indian than you like to admit it. They show shades of brownness and whiteness woven together, and that in the generation that narrowly cannot be described monochromatically. They need to be continually aware of their world at any point in time, become adept at interpreting one world to the other in order to make sense of their liminal transcultural existence. All expressions of meaning are reinterpreted afresh, and they move across cultural lines, and those boundaries are blurred in the unique subculture and duality of personhood. Hybrids suffer from perpetual jet lag, perpetual cultural jet lag, a sense of disorientation or being in one place while feeling that they belong somewhere else, as they traverse between multiple times every day between two worlds. Any untimely act or a word can have disastrous long-term consequences from which is nearly impossible to recover from. When their different worlds collide, the tectonic place of the diverse worldviews and customs, it sends giant tsunami waves on the shores of the coconut psyche. And if you find nothing or no one to hang on to when these tremors occur, many of them are swept away into the receding waves and drowned in the depths of the confusion of hybridity. Stuart Halls said this beautifully. Diasporic identities are those that are constantly produced and reproduced anew through transformation and difference. Those who believe that the West and the East and the West can never meet, I'm referring to Rudy Kipling's writings, they were sadly mistaken. While a myriad of paradoxes paralyzes the immigrant generation, their descendants thrive in the midst of chaos and perfectly uphold these discordant dilemmas. They fit effortlessly everywhere and nowhere in particular. They are both insider as well as outsider at the same time. Their roots lie in the uprootedness and in multiple locales, while their allegiances remain beyond culture and geographies. At the same time, their subculture is defined, this generation morphs into disparate entity altogether. So those who amalgamate multiple modes of thinking and functioning have a distinct advantages over those who do exclusively in unilateral terms, and ensues this multifarious polyphonic sensibility. So they extract cues from manifold diverse contexts and synergize them for an appropriate response without weighing one over the other or subjugating any one in light of the others. It's like hollows, I say. You know, this generation has mixed up one potent concoction such that without any single piece of all of its components, they will lack the intoxicating power. It seeks deeper for truth, and by keenly listening with their eyes and intently pursuing authentic relationship, while that will transform their lives inside out. In order to evangelize and disciple the generation, both parents and the church leaders have to take every facet of their complex life seriously and refrain from forcing them into the mold of yesteryears, born out of solitary cultural charter. Coconut generation does not live in either or, but in both and worlds. The divergent worlds that has totally been incompatible for each other in the past have beautifully coalesced and together in a creative convergence with this new generation. They become adept at circumnavigating through the hybridized terrains and acquire essential life skill of intercultural competency, which enable them to thrive in complex contemporary world and facilitate the transference of reality from one world to the other. The fusion of the East and the West spring forth new imaginative vitality, and this creative creolization, along with their cultural borderlands, is subversive to master codes, current statutes, and dominant ideologies. By decentering norms and reordering sequences, it creates a new strategic inflection points through narrative transformation and reaccentuation of traditions and integrating prevailing systems. As a result, new rituals are invented, new meanings are given to practices, and new levels of devotion and ultimate questions of life and eternity is established. Parenting and ministering to this generation continue to puzzle and remain an exorbitant challenge to immigrant generation as well as immigrant church leaders, while promises are just being realized. I want to take this point to kind of jump into some theoretical frameworks on hybridity that will help us to understand and wrap our minds around this. A growing body of literature, page 72. On account of globalization and transnational migration and deterritorialization has critiqued and deconstructed discourses of rootedness and hegemonic views of identity, culture, and power. Purity and pollution was the defining order of the ancient world, mixing up any kind of things that derided by religious or civil laws that had strictly stipulated or forbidden any form of interaction with people unlike themselves. The social hierarchies were invented, like the caste system in India. Prohibitions were severe penalty and were established to restrict interaction with only within the certain categories. Miscegenation laws, which is marrying outside the community, where laws were legislated and racial mixing of people were shunned and marginalized. Polluted ones had to undergo cumbersome cleansing rituals in order to be reinstated back into the social order or suffer from ostracization. The elaborate customs and rigid boundary walls were erected by the social, economic, political, religious elites to keep the other as the other, while pursuing self-interest at all costs. The post-colonial discourse, the subaltern margins, contents hegemonic power structures of the center, and hybridity disrupts the exclusive prerogatives of a select few by contaminating the boundaries of inquiry and grafting new knowledge from various disciplines, including that of the subjugate itself and the knowledge of the subaltern groups. Consequently, hybridity is defined by essentially, not by essence of purity, but by the recognition of necessary fluidity, heterogeneity, and diversity on a continuous basis. Homi Bhabha, one of the pioneers of this concept of hybridity, in his seminal essay, How Newness Enters the World, he talks, Homi Bhabha shifted the limelight from the binaries of the colonizer and the colonized to the limited spaces in betweenness. The vantage point of liminality he elaborates using architectural simile like stairways, a pathway between upper level and the lower level of a house, or a literary conception of blasphemy, which is not only merely a misrepresentation of the sacred by the secular, but as a moment when the content of the cultural tradition is being overwhelmed and alienated in the act of translation. And that's what happens in hybridity, translation and cultural diffusion that occurs, and that's of interest to missions. The emerging culture that develops in the new soil of the third space is alike and different from the parent cultures. Hybrid are not only double-voiced and double-accented, but is also double language. It is there that the two individual consciousness, two voices, and two accents, as they are doubling of the socio-linguistic consciousness, two epochs that comes together. They are pregnant with potential for the new worldviews, with new internal forms for perceiving the world in new words. Hybridity is essentially an interdisciplinary in its nature, showcases the futility of the knowledge within certain particular domains. It democratizes knowledge by letting discordant views of multiple worlds to participate in the production of new knowledge and grasp new realities. With the duality of personhood and the intercultural sensibility, hybrids develop a natural translation capacity by which they decipher one world input into the other world to make sense of both the worlds in their interstitial existence. Every sensory impulse goes through this translation mechanism at the back of their heads as they describe and convert into intelligible and appropriate responses. That is subversive to master course and into the new world. As long as both worlds make sense and are compatible and meaningful correlations can be made between them, they can survive the situations that are manageable. Any failure to do so can result in stressful and can end up in depression. Hybrids develop a sense of multiple belonging and is adept at thriving in multiple contexts. In other words, they become like cultural chameleons, continually adapting to the new context naturally and almost effortlessly. When they fail to do so, they stand exposed and vulnerable and pay a very dear price, sometimes with their very lives, in the interstitial crevices of the marginal hybrid existence. I want to skip the next paragraph and jump on to page 74. On account of increased human mobility and interconnectivity between people all over the world, there is an unprecedented level of interaction between people and intermingling of cultures, leading to the formation of greater fluidity in cultures. The growing hybridization will challenge the prevailing notions of identity, community, and mission. While the diasporic narratives of the Bible, such as expulsion from the garden, exodus and exile and dispersion, etc., and the theological and anthropological resources have much to contribute to the missiological reimagination on account of hybridity. In developing a theology of race, Jennings locates, this is Willie James Jennings, a classical book on race and theology. Jennings locates the root error of forcible subjugation, dispossession, and removal of non-European people from their homelands, where the displacement inflicted on them an incurable loss of identity that is fundamentally tied to the land. The point he stresses is Christian theology and segregational mentalities are firmly entrenched within the style of imagining social reality, and that is deceased in the kind of community imagined. Its scope, its character, its materiality. And they thought the formation of Christian community beyond the strictures of nation, language, and people. At the very core of hybrids exhibit a duality of personhood. Two natures, two tendencies, and two personas fused together in one new kind of person who is able to switch between multiple shapes, multiple spheres easily. Some see it as an abnormal multiple personality disorder or cultural schizophrenia. But in other ways, this is a double consciousness. Theologians have described Jesus as a mulatto, hybrid between divinity and humanity, or his hybrid ancestry. Showcase Jesus as a mestizo, a son of a Galilean, mixed and marginalized society, who enters the great city of Jerusalem in order to challenge its wealth and to confront the racial arrogance of the culturally pure elites. The construction of new Christological vision of seeing Jesus as a tragic mulatto or a marginalized mestizo confronts the contrived delusion and the violence of racial purity, wealth and power dynamics, which emerges from the mixedness of flesh and spirit, as well as geographical and socio-cultural blending in the person of Jesus, offers a new and hopeful model for identity, community, and mission for today's hybrids in our contemporary world of much chaos, pain, and confusion. Latin American scholars have helped us to understand, just like we read Daniel Alvarez's paper. And his book is a really good book. I would strongly encourage you to read that. It introduces us to the world of Messiology, which helps us to communicate, to draw equally from diverse cultural inheritances. Don't look one over the other. The mestizo, the mixed blood, affirms both identities received while offering something new to both. They are uniquely qualified to question the arrogant claims of purity made by some states or races. While they have no abiding city on earth, Messiso's loyalty lies neither to a race or to a nation, but to a New Jerusalem, the eternal city of God. Alvarez uses the Messis as a concept to develop the theology of immigration by highlighting the identity and the otherness in the context of undocumented immigrants from south of the border. Such viewpoint is disruptive to the traditional social, economic, and racial hierarchies. It transcends the historical and socio-cultural sentiments to knit together a global multi-ethnic kingdom vision like that we see in Revelation 7:9 for a society where there is no Jew or Greek or slave or Greek or free, no male or no female. Galatians, Paul's vision. It is without domination or inherent privileges or prejudices. It is the potent theology for a deracinated, hybridized people in an ever-globalizing diasporic world who define their identities not by roots or race, but by routes of diasporic displacement, an incoherent sense of mixedness which is constantly on the move. As I close, I want to kind of look at a couple of biblical characters, and I want to kind of reflect from the hybrid perspective. My two characters are Moses and Paul. Moses was a fourth generation Hebrew on his father's side, a third generation on his mother's side. They were a Levite family. The family tree is there in chapter 6. So we see how his unique hybrid reality, growing up both in Egyptian and Hebrew world, helped him to make sense of his life and his unique calling and mission in life. And then, of course, Paul, jumping to the next section. Likewise, Paul was a diaspora Jew who grew up in Tarsus, and we know his story. What does it mean to be in Asia Minor? Studied under Gamaliel, encounters Christ in Syria and Damascus. Was a Roman citizen, and then a great Greek scholar, and writes much of New Testament. Both Moses and Paul has very strategic influence on the Hebrew and the Christian communities respectively, primarily on account of their hybridity. Moses remains the most influential leader of the Israelites in the Old Testament, and Paul is the most influential leader of the early days of the Christian church in New Testament. God used the Egyptian background of Moses to secure freedom for the enslaved slaves from the Egyptian emperor and also lead them into the promised land, while God used the Greek background of Paul to expansion of the gospel into the Gentiles. God uses both of them to write sizable part of the Old and New Testaments. The turning point in their lives, in spite of their unique background and exceptional abilities, was their dramatic encounter with God. Exodus chapter 3 and verse Acts chapter 9, which completely reoriented their identity and vocational callings in life. Both not only were able to overcome the liminality of hybrid selves, but also effectively used their multiple cultural bearings for the advance of the kingdom and the life missions. The social-cultural plurality gives strong theological compelling center to which all diversities can be held together, a core that remains faithful and true, who radically reorients our view of self and our ultimate life mission. The liminality creates creativity, helps us to engage the critical historiography that condemns the sins of our ancestors while forging new fidelity and faithful communities, because to be a diaspora people is to be people on mission. This is Daniel Christopher's writing on biblical theology of exile. The cultural diffusion occurs naturally in hybrids on account of their concomitant existence in multiple worlds, and they become proficient translators and result in the development of hybridized theology by repairing identities and renegotiating boundaries, reconstructing narratives, and rediscovering meanings, establishing new faiths. So as I close, I want to quote one statement from Mother Teresa. I begin the Coca-Cola Generation book with this quote. I had the opportunity to travel with her and met her, and I found her in one of her journals. By blood and origin, I'm an Albanian. By citizenship, I am an Indian. I'm a Catholic nun. As to my calling, I belong to the whole world. As to my heart, I belong entirely to Jesus. It beckons us and challenges us to establish at the very core of our identity and our ultimate allegiance beyond the places of birth or a current habitation, ethnicity, citizenship, or vocation. It calls us to build our identities upon a deeper sense of life calling And our heart allegiances will not only liberate us from the popular trappings of psychosocial, cultural, ideological notions of identification, but bestow us with faith filled with fidelity to a vision for life that is deeply meaningful and enduring. And that's what calls us to this challenge of hybridity, mission in the hybrid context. The last sentence there. The redemptive purposes of cultural liminality of hybrids can be realized only in and through the transformative encounter with the ultimate hybrid of all times, Jesus Christ, who bridged the chasm of heaven and earth such that all hybrids will find their eternal destiny in the finished work and the life-giving, life-fulfilling mission of God in our world. Thank you.